Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Sermon. I'm your host, Matt Hotho, and for today's episode of Beyond the Sermon, we're actually going to be replaying a longer talk, about 45 minutes long, that Dr. Clarke gave at our church on May 13th called Decoding Your Emotions. It is so pertinent to the series that we're on, the good, the bad, and the healthy, talking about our emotions and how we deal with them in healthy ways. Check it out.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? And everyone can see the presentation, great. So as Sally said, my name is Clarke. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I have a private practice here in Tampa. Does anyone know where Jimbo's Barbecue is? Okay, right across the street from Jimbo's Barbecue. And I also see clients, there individually, adults, and then also see clients online. Virtually, typically by telephone, throughout the country as well. The topic tonight, obviously, decoding our emotions, is something that I talk about with clients all the time and comes into my personal life quite regularly. I have two kids. I have a 6 and an 8-year-old, and they refer to me as a feelings doctor. They couldn't say psychologist when they were little, so now they continue to refer to me as a feelings doctor. And when they have something that is a feeling-related story to tell or something to say, they get very excited and they come to me and they say, "Mom, we know you love feelings," which is great. And I want them to know that I like feelings. I want all of you to be comfortable talking about feelings, thinking about feelings, helping loved ones around you with their feelings, because that really is the way to live the most full life. And we're going to talk about that. So with that being said, this presentation covers a lot of initial kind of general ways to manage emotions, the reason we have emotions, what they can do for us, why they're so important. And then we're going to go into some specifics about specific emotions and some tools to work with those. I will say, when I've given presentations like this here or other places, usually if you have a question, someone else has the same question too. So if you are confident enough and courageous enough to ask the question, please do. You can raise your hand. I know we're in a bigger room here tonight than usual. If you want to raise your hand and ask the question during the presentation, that's fine. If I don't see you, just yell at me. But also you're welcome to save it to the end. I'll save some time for questions as well. And again, that usually is something that benefits the whole group. Okay? All right, so we're going to jump in first and foremost with just the function of emotions. And this isn't going to be super surprising to anyone. We know that emotions serve a lot of purpose: survival and threat detection, decision-making and motivation, social awareness and connection. The way that we feel helps us understand how others might be feeling. Self-awareness and value identification and figuring out what's important to us. Meaning and memories is also derived from emotion. The emotions that we feel most strongly, the memories that we feel most strongly tend to be the ones associated with strong emotions. So we know that for sure there's an emotional component to memories. Right here on the right is a feelings wheel. And so this is something that I use all the time in my practice. You can see fairly well, depends on how good your eyes are if you have your glasses. In the middle are kind of the basic emotions. And then from there, it gets more and more detailed and more specific. So the reason that I use this is there's a huge value in just identifying the emotion. So some of you all might have heard McGray talk about this in his sermon a couple weeks ago when he was talking about fear and sadness. And it was something that I shared with him and he brought into the sermon about why it's important to just label our emotions. That in and of itself is really therapeutic. The analogy that I use with this is that if I'm sleeping tonight and I hear a loud crash, my room's pitch black, I hear a loud crash, it's going to be nearly impossible for me to turn over and just go to sleep. Say, I'm not going to worry about that because my heart's going to be racing. I'm going to be in fight or flight. I'm probably thinking worst case scenario. As scary as it might be, most of us will have to turn on a light and figure out what's going on. We're going to go investigate the issue. So if we turn on the light, we might notice a dog knocked over the lamp or a book fell. What we can do then is we can at that point decide, do we want to do anything about this or do we want to wait until tomorrow to clean it up? Either way is perfectly fine if it's a pretty innocuous situation, but now I can go to sleep knowing what the issue is. Same thing goes for emotions. So if I can at least identify what I'm feeling as opposed to saying, I'm going to bury my head in the sand and I'm not going to feel it, I'm not going to feel it, I'm not going to feel it. I don't want to think about it. I can identify it and then figure out what I want to do with it. So that identification part is turning the light on. So if I have a client who's sitting with a bunch of emotions and they can't even really figure out what it is, we look at this and say, okay, point to any of them that might be in the realm of fitting. And that gives us a really good place to start. And again, in and of itself, it's therapeutic to just know what the emotion itself is and then go from there. If there is nothing else that you get from tonight, I want you to recognize that emotions are just messengers. They only send a message. That is all they do. You've heard McGray probably say emotions are value neutral. They're not good, bad, or otherwise. They are just emotions and they are just messengers. They do convey important information, and as we become better able to recognize the messages, then we can figure out what to do with them. We're not scared of any of the emotions. But awareness and curiosity are key. We have to want to know what the message is that they're trying to send us. So the reason that there's a bus here is I want you to remember the bus driver analogy. This is one that you can share with anyone. I share this one with my kids, and when I used to see kid clients, they got it very easily too. It's a great and very easy one for emotion management. The analogy goes like this. We are all driving our own bus. We're the driver. All of our emotions are in the back. So we've got sadness, we've got anxiety, we've got anger, we've got happiness, excitement, all of those. They're in the back. The issue comes when we don't listen to what emotion is yelling at us from the back. Say anxiety is yelling at me, and it's saying, take a right, take a right, take a right. And I put on headphones, and I say, I'm not gonna listen to you, I'm not gonna listen to you. It's gonna get louder and louder until it shoves me out of the driver's seat, and now all of a sudden, anxiety is driving. However, if I can hear what the message is that the emotion is trying to tell me, I, as the driver, get to decide what I want to do about it. So anxiety is saying either stop or take a right or whatever it might think is the best plan. I get to say, I actually don't think that's in my best interest. Instead, I'm actually going to keep on this path because I know if I take that route, it's only going to increase my anxiety. In addition to that, if it's something like depression, we know it'll say, stay home, don't go out, don't talk to friends, don't take a shower, don't brush your teeth, don't eat anything, which are all things that perpetuate depression. So if we can keep ourselves in the driver's seat, and when depression or anxiety or any other emotion starts yelling at us, we get to decide which direction we want to go, and we stay in control. The scariest part of emotions is this idea of being out of control of emotions, worrying that they are going to take over and we're not going to be able to get back in the driver's seat. You can always stay in the driver's seat, and that's the best way to manage the message and hear the message that whatever emotion it is trying to send, and then decide, is that in my best interest? Is that getting me where I want to go? Or do I need to take a different path? Because as soon as you listen to it, it pipes down. It feels heard. So you get to then operate from the driver's seat versus feeling like that emotion takes over, okay? This goes right along with the idea of a reaction versus a response. A reaction is when the emotion pushes you out of the driver's seat and it starts driving. We can think about reaction as the primitive brain or that reptilian brain, where the second I feel something, so say someone hits me, I want to hit them back. That might not be in my best interest. But if I can go from reaction to response is where I bring in, we think of kind of the downstairs and the upstairs brain. The downstairs brain is that reptilian brain. The upstairs brain is higher thinking, higher functioning. So you've got your prefrontal cortex that helps with decision making, and that can say, ooh, not a great idea. That's not where we actually want to go. That's not actually what I want to do with this big emotion. First thing, in order to move from reaction to response, because that's all good in theory, but it's very hard to hold back when you have that intense emotion. First thing to do, though, is evaluate the level of intensity of the emotion. All day long, I ask clients, what's the intensity? What's the scale, 0 to 10? How intense are you feeling whatever it is you're feeling? Because we want to be able to differentiate, and just by putting a number on it, we get a little better lay of the land. Okay, when I was at a 7 before, this is what I did and that really helped. When I was at a 4, I actually didn't really need to do much. I just kind of let it go for a little bit. If, however, you evaluate it and you're between a 7 and a 10 on that intensity scale of whatever the emotion is, and typically we're thinking about the ones that lead to maybe the not so great reactions, anger, frustration, sadness, grief, things like that. If you're at a 7 to 10, first you want to lower the intensity. It's very hard to operate effectively and in a healthy manner when you're at the 7 to 10. This is where actually distraction can be really helpful. That could look like physical activity. That's a great one. A lot of times, I actually had a mentor. I used to work at a substance abuse treatment program in grad school. And when any of his residential patients would call him with an issue, as they were going through detoxing and things like that, he would say, go for a 30-minute walk and then call me back. And it's this idea that when you first talk to someone or when you're first letting out emotions, they can feel really big if you're at a 7 through a 10. But that's all that primitive brain talking. If you can go on a walk, listen to some music, not amp yourself up more, but do something that's slightly distracting, you can bring it down. And that in and of itself helps us move from reaction to a response. So I am totally okay with distraction, with the idea that you will come back around to whatever the emotion is to deal with, not just avoidance. The other piece that is probably the number one thing to move from reaction to response and to lower the intensity from that 7 to 10 is activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So we've all heard, when you're stressed out, take a deep breath. I won't go into all the details of this. If you've been to a talk of mine before, I talk about this in almost every discussion, primarily because there's a lack of understanding as to why that's so important to take a slow, deep breath and what it looks like to take a slow, deep breath. So the parasympathetic nervous system, kind of the real quick version, is you have this seesaw inside in your nervous system. You've got the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. We all know the sympathetic because that's fight or flight. We've all heard of fight or flight. That's your sympathetic nervous system. On the other side, we have parasympathetic nervous system. But the important part here is they're on a seesaw. So if fight or flight is activated, the parasympathetic system, which we can think of as rest and digest, that's not. It's suppressed. The number one way to boost this system and to pull this system down in turn is slow, deep breathing. Your exhale specifically activates the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the key. If you are someone or you know someone who experiences panic attacks, teach them this because you cannot have a panic attack if you are doing this kind of slow, deep breathing. They are incompatible processes. You cannot be anxious and relaxed physiologically at the same time because of this seesaw. So again, if you want to stay in the driver's seat and anxiety is saying, ooh, let's veer off over this panic attack, if you can activate your parasympathetic nervous system, you cannot have a panic attack. It slows everything down. So I want to do a quick little group exercise for those here and those online. You're welcome to do this if you want. If not, just listen to it because then you can do it at home. It's not participatory in terms of having to say anything. I would just want to talk you through what the slow, deep breathing looks like. So the slow, deep breathing is something unique called, I just call it the double inhale and the slow exhale. It's also called a psychological sigh, but it is the most effective way to slow down your breathing and to activate that parasympathetic nervous system. So what it looks like is a slow inhale through your nose for a count of 6. You hold it, you add a little bit more air, you kind of top off, and then you exhale for a count of 8. Slow, deep breath. The exhale can be through your nose or your mouth. It is important, though, that the inhale's through your nose because it forces you to slow down. No one has ever hyperventilated through their nose. They go, so we want to just do slow, deep through our nose to slow everything down, okay? So I'm going to talk you through it. If you do have a trauma history of any kind, or if you ever teach this to someone with a trauma history, you don't need to close your eyes. That can be triggering. So if you want to keep your eyes open or closed, if you don't have that trauma history, then that's perfectly fine. Okay, we're just going to do 2 breaths like this. And you can see how it feels so you can use it, hopefully, to help you get from reaction to response. So everyone let all the air out. All right. Okay, now inhale through your nose real slow. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold it. Add a little more air. And then exhale. Real slow. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One more. Inhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold it. Add a little more air. And exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So anyone who just participated in that is actively in that parasympathetic rest and digest side of things right now. Doesn't mean you need to stay there all the time, but it's a great tool to have. It's a great one if you're a parent and you're waiting in car line for your kids and you want to kind of reset before your kids hop in the car. Great time to do it then. If you're coming home from work, if you are about to go into work, 2 or 3 breaths, that's it. You can do it while you're waiting for your coffee to brew, while your water's filling up. But doing it real regularly allows you to know what it feels like. So when you are in that more anxious state and you want to use it, you're not trying to teach it to yourself then. It's also great for sleep and helping your body recognize that it's time for sleep, and that it's okay to let that rest and digest system take over, okay? But it is one of the number one ways to reduce stress in the body and help move from that reaction to a response. Okay. So the last thing I want to say in the more general context is this idea of managing emotions. So when a while back, before I started my private practice, I worked in the VA, and I worked with residential treatment, in a residential treatment program for veterans and active duty service members who had experienced trauma, either combat trauma or military sexual trauma. So they were coming in, and the treatments they had done in their home VAs and things like that hadn't worked. They come and stay for about 6 weeks and do really intensive PTSD treatment. With that, the analogy that I often used with them and still use with a lot of clients now is this idea of a shaken soda bottle. When we have big emotions, scary emotions, it feels like we're on the inside of a shaken soda bottle. And if I am to take the top off, it will keep spewing bubbles forever and ever and ever. So I have to keep the lid on that thing so tight that I numb out everything. And that was one of the biggest things in terms of getting the buy-in from someone who's experienced a lot of that numbing and who really relies on that numbing, is how much you miss out on, because you can't just numb the negative. You can't just numb the trauma side or the anxiety side or the fear side. You end up numbing everything, and that's not really a really full life. So being able to recognize that if we can take that soda bottle top off and recognize it might spew out a little bit, but not forever. And once we have let the pressure out, I can now take the top on and off with no issue. I'm not scared of it bubbling over. It's that initial bubbling that's so scary. And that's why having some type of support, some person who you can talk to, or whether it's journaling or prayer or therapy, having some kind of meditation that allows you to sit with the emotion to override the fear that says, if I take this top off, I'm not ever going to be able to put it back on. We know that's not true. But if we can sit with the emotion, we can move through it a lot more effectively. So we need to be able to be curious about what the emotion is, and if it feels too scary to take that top off by ourselves, finding a trusted person who we can talk to about it, to make sure that there is someone, if we feel like we are kind of losing it, if it's bubbling over too much, not to just slam the top back on, but to say, okay, this is hard, but I know if I let this bubble out, it will eventually stop, and I'll be able to take this on and off with no problem. Okay? All right, we're gonna move to some specific emotions. Any questions before we jump that way? Okay, so going along with this idea of seeing different people numbing out emotions and knowing that that is something that if we start feeling just a myriad of really negative emotions, there can be a temptation of, I just don't want to feel any of this. There's a book called No Mud, No Locusts by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk, and this is a quote from it that I really like, and it has to do with sadness. Most people are afraid of suffering, but suffering is a kind of mud to help the lotus flower of happiness grow. There can be no lotus, not locust. There can be no lotus flower without the mud. So just recognizing the other analogy is kind of the stained glass window. Stained glass windows are beautiful in one color, but when they are a bunch of different colors, they're so much more vibrant. And when we can be accepting of all the different emotions we have, we lead a much more vibrant life, even though some might be a little bit more difficult. When it comes to processing sadness or grief, one of the things I tend to recommend is to schedule time for it. If I'm working with someone who has experienced a significant loss or a big life transition and they are still in the midst of transitioning with that, being able to set aside time gives us the opportunity to go through our emotions of our day-to-day life, which is really important. Go through the motions even if you don't feel like it. Go through the motions, but set aside time to deal with those bigger emotions. So being able to say, okay, I'm having thoughts of this loved one and I'm in the middle of a meeting and I can't take the time right now to process it, but if I know tonight at 5:30, from 5:30 to 6:30, anything that has come up during my day, I have the opportunity to think about, to talk through, to work through. I am not telling that emotion, stay back there, I don't want to hear you. It's not right now. Come back at 5:30. And that allows us to put some parameters on those big emotions as opposed to feeling like it's bleeding out everywhere. And what you'll likely notice is when you give it time to be a part of your day, it doesn't knock on the door quite as loudly. It might do a little knock here and there, hey, remember me. But if you are attending to it regularly, it ends up being a lot more, it's a lot more validating to our emotion. It allows our emotion to move more freely. I'm big on developing a statement to share with others, and this may differ depending on the setting, the situation, or the person. Emotion, and you're going into a situation where people are going to ask about it. It's hard. It's usually great. It's wonderful. They're likely being very compassionate. I notice this a lot with clients. I work with a lot of clients who are going through divorces and things like that. And it's that awkward, some people know, some people don't. I don't really want to say anything. We're still kind of in the whole legal battle. Being able to figure out what you want to say gives you a tool in your toolbox where you don't have to get caught off guard. Okay, with this group of people, I'm not really interested in sharing. I want to express the appreciation that they're asking about it versus just ignoring it. But I also am not at a place where I really want to talk about it. So being able to say something along the lines of, hey, that's so sweet of you to ask. There's really no news to report, but I'll be sure to let you know once there's anything. But I appreciate the comment about it, the question. So it gives you a little bit of a tool, and I want you to have lots of different tools for something like this because it does differ depending on the setting, the person, and the situation. But if you notice you're feeling some anxiety about going into a group, big or small, figure out what your words are. Figure out how you want to explain it. Even, I work with college kids a lot too, and even this idea of where are you going to school next year? And they might not know. They might not know, they might not have decided. Mom might have one opinion, dad might have another. They didn't get into either of those schools. Whatever it might be, that's a big question. Or when are you going to get married? When are you guys going to have kids? Those questions get really taxing. And so if you can have an answer to each of those, you feel much more prepared, like you've got some armor going into these different situations. Along with that is being able to find your people that you can talk to about this stuff, or just the people that boost your mood, even if they're not someone you're gonna share these feelings with. My hope is that everyone can identify one person in their life, even if they're on an outer periphery, who's just an up person, who brings you up when you talk to them, who tends to be a pretty positive person, who tends to, not toxically positive, but just a pretty positive person who you leave feeling better than you went in. Martin Seligman is he's kind of the forefather of what we think of as positive psychology, which is a newer form of psychology in the last few decades that focuses on enhancing mental wellness versus just fighting mental illness. And in his research on wellness, he's got some really great books, but in his research on wellness, he wrote that human connection, so social connection, is the best antidote to the downs of life and the single most reliable up. If you are feeling down, talk to someone. Not even about the issue, again, not even about the issue. Connect with someone. Go have a conversation with the person bagging your groceries at the grocery store. Ask them how their day is going. Get outside your own head and outside your own bubble and have some point of connection. It's a huge way to improve mood. And then with all these emotions, but specifically with sadness, when we think about depression, again, depression will tell us, don't take care of yourself, don't drink the water, don't eat the food, don't do the physical activity. We know, though, that just perpetuates depression, sadness, grief. So we have to be able to go through the motions. We have to be able to do the things that make us feel good. So at the very least, making sure that you are getting proper nutrition. You're having some snacks that you can eat nearby that you aren't going to have to worry about too much. You're drinking enough water. You're getting some movement in. It's also a good time to think about any things that you would normally do that usually make you feel good. And maybe you feel like they wouldn't be so helpful right now, or maybe they aren't at the top of your list. Do them anyways. It's fake it until you feel it. If you keep going through the motions of, okay, I love running. If I don't feel like running though, and I'm going through a period of sadness, I'm gonna get outside, and maybe I don't wanna run, maybe I just wanna walk and be in nature, because that's part of why I love running. But being able to say, okay, at least 30 minutes a day, I'm gonna get outside and I'm gonna get some fresh air and I'm gonna get some movement, because I know that's usually something I like. My body will catch up eventually. But just being able to kind of force your body into it for the initial part is what can usually get the ball rolling and keeps us in the driver's seat and builds those things into our life that make us feel good. All right, now we're gonna talk about anger. So anger we actually think of as more of a secondary emotion. It's one that some people, and you might know some people who might default to anger pretty easily. That's kind of their quick go-to. But usually what you can see here is it's usually the tip of the iceberg. There's usually quite a bit under it. And if we can identify what's under it, we're in a much better position to figure out what is fueling it. And so there's a quote by Rumi, the poet. It says, if you are irritated by every rub, how will you be polished? So if you jump to anger and never get deeper than that, you're just going to go with anger. It might feel good in the moment, but it's not actually going to get you too far in terms of self-development and being able to figure out, what do I have? How do I stay in the driver's seat here, and what can I do about it? If you've been to a talk of mine before, you've also probably heard of the shoulds. It ends up in almost every talk, and in every with every client that I have, we talk about it at some point because it is so pervasive. The word should is my least favorite word in the English language, primarily because we unintentionally use it to guilt and shame ourselves. When we put a should internally, I should have done this, I shouldn't have done that, oh man, I shouldn't have done that thing, or I shouldn't have taken as long doing this. We are guilt and shaming ourselves, and there's nothing we can do about it because we're just talking about the past. If we put our shoulds on others, why did he do that? He shouldn't have done that. She shouldn't have cut me off just now. She shouldn't have shown up late for this meeting. Those things are maybe very valid, but they don't get us anywhere. That builds resentment very quickly. I have yet to work with a person in my individual counseling sessions who has an issue with a relative, a family member, and there's not a should there. She shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have done that. It's resentment immediately. And so if we can catch it and replace it, that's the antidote. So the antidote, instead of I should have or shouldn't have, being able to say, I wish I had, or I wish I hadn't, or I wish he hadn't, or I wish she hadn't. Now I get to do something about it. I wish he hadn't done that. So example, if someone cuts you off in traffic, I wish he hadn't done that. What am I gonna do about it? Do I wanna accept it, or do I wanna do something about it? If it's someone I know, I might talk to him about it. But if it's someone who's gonna go about their day and it's not going home with them, I don't wanna take it home with me. Which leads us to this second piece here, which is a quote that's attributed to a bunch of different people online, and I don't know who actually said it, but holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's resentment. Resentment eats us up, and it kills our relationships. And it plants a seed that's underneath that anger of maybe hurt or rejection. But being able to say, okay, I wish they hadn't done that. Here's what I want to do now. Maybe I do want to let go of it. Maybe I want to have some cognitive flexibility. So if we go back to this situation, if we just talk about road rage, someone cuts you off, you get really angry. For myself, not for them, because I'm probably never going to see that person again. For myself, not for them, it behooves me to have some cognitive flexibility. So I might play a game with myself. Okay, I just think that person's a jerk. They cut me off, they obviously saw me, they waited too long to get in front of me. But if I can have some cognitive flexibility and say, okay, maybe they're from out of town and they don't know these roads. Maybe they were on the phone and just got some bad news and weren't paying attention. Maybe they've got a 2-year-old in the backseat that they were trying to hand a snack to while also driving while their 4-year-old's screaming at them. I don't know if any of those are true. But by just thinking of the possibility that maybe it's not that this person's a horrible person, but these other factors might be at play, it doesn't excuse the behavior, but I've got a little fuller picture and my intensity of emotion goes down. And that's for me. Again, they're never gonna know that that's what I just did in my head. But now I'm not going home with the same level of intensity and anger that I had when it happened. So being able to have some cognitive flexibility, being able to essentially use the creativity that we have in jumping to anger to see if there may be some other possibilities that someone is doing what they did. Now, going back though to this idea of acceptance or action, there might be certain situations that you're angry with someone for what they did, but you get to decide how you want to respond to it, and it might be action. If it's someone though that you've said the same thing to 4 different times and they are not hearing you, it's probably time for boundaries instead. And acceptance that they aren't interested in changing that behavior. So another quote, an Aristotle one that I really like, is anyone can become angry, that is easy, but to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everyone's power and it is not easy. You gotta know the why behind your anger. And so being able to look at something like this and say, okay, do any of those fit right now? And if one of those fits, what do I want to do about it? Is it action? Is it acceptance? And can I go through some of these different factors here and decide how intense does my emotion need to be about this? Does this seem like it's a little bit out of proportion? Does this seem accurate? Who am I actually upset with? And that way you can start to channel it into a direction that becomes much more constructive than destructive. All right, if you've been following along with McGray's Servant, or if you have seen the new Inside Out movie, this is Fear and Anxiety. It's a very cute movie, even for adults, even if there are no kids involved. Very good movie, the 1 and 2. But these are the little characters. That the one on the purple one is fear, and the orange kind of wacky looking one is anxiety. So I want to differentiate a little between the two, but there's a lot of overlap. And so the way I want to differentiate between them is fear being something that is a response to an immediate and present threat. Someone cuts me off. I got to slam on the brakes. There's fear. I get thrown into fight or flight, which I need to be. Fight or flight and fear are 100% a blessing. If there's a bear chasing me, I need fight or flight to be able to pool all the resources to my arms and legs to get out of there. Most of the time, though, there's not a bear chasing us. And our fear can get amped up, and we need to be able to put it into its place. So again, being able to look at it and say, where does this fall on a scale of 1 to 10? I have a client who I've worked with for a long, long time, probably about 10 years now, and one of the things he first came in with, it was during hurricane season, and he had a lot of fears around hurricanes and a lot of realistic fears about what to do, how to keep his family safe. What's interesting, though, is as time went on and he went through different hurricane seasons and found some different ways to prepare and different ways to push back against the maybe unproductive worry and go to the more productive place, is it changed significantly when we got one of the big ones, and I believe it was Irma. And at that point, it was more recent than Irma, but I can't think of the name of which one it was. But it was one that was essentially a 10 out of 10 on his anxiety scale. And he said, when he came back a couple weeks later, he said, okay, if that's a 10 out of 10, none of the other ones can be 10 out of 10s now. I can't go back to that place because that I know was actually the worst and we were okay. But now my scale is different. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is everything can't be a 10 out of 10. So when you have the tools to deal with the 7, 8, 9s, or when you have a big 10 out of 10, being able to say, okay, if that's my 10 out of 10, these aren't that high. What do I need to do? Is it action? Is it acceptance? But I have to put it in perspective. And just by labeling it a lot of times, if my body is saying it's a 10 out of 10, but then I label it a 10 out of 10, and I'm thinking, well, that's not really a 10 out of 10. This other situation a year ago, I was much more stressed or fearful at that point. I have to be able to scale it back. Perspective to that scale. When it comes to anxiety, we think about worry about potential future threat, the what ifs. A lot of us are really creative with how things could go wrong. That is anxiety. Being able to figure out where the anxiety is coming from, what part of it is productive and what part of it is unproductive, can be really useful. My kids, I talk with my clients about this too, but we also talk with our kids about this idea of the worry can come with you, or the anxiety can come with you. It's not about not having anxiety. It's not about saying I can only do something once anxiety is at a 0. It's saying, okay, at a 4 or 5, I'm a little uncomfortable, but I can still do it. 7 or an 8, if it's something I really want to do, I want to be able to push through that anxiety and say, okay, what's the likelihood that there's going to be a threat, and how can I mitigate that? As opposed to just putting our blinders on and saying, I'm not going to think about it, I'm not going to think about it, I'm just going to push through and do it, I'm actually a big fan of playing the tape to the end. What that could look like is, okay, I'm nervous about this situation. So for example, I'll tell you guys about my safety stool, my security stool. I was telling Matt about this earlier. So I have never had a moment of like lightheadedness or anything like that during any of my talks, but it's always a fear of mine. And so whenever I give a talk, I put a stool or a chair or something like that. Because for me, as opposed to saying, oh my gosh, I need to go and find a stool or find a chair, it's there. And that was born from this idea of, okay, I have this worry. What happens if I start feeling faint while I'm giving a talk? So instead of saying, well, don't think about that. That's never happened before. You're probably going to be fine. I said, okay, I can just get a stool. If that were to happen, all I need to do is sit down. So if I can put a stool up here, perfectly fine. So just that idea of, if I can play the tape to the end, I can either figure out what tools I need to put in place to minimize the impact of that anxiety or that fear coming to fruition, or to potentially figure out if I can just handle it. Okay, what if I say something awkward to a new person that I meet? I'm probably the only one thinking about it that night. They probably have totally forgotten. And if not, they're probably thinking, oh good, I thought I was the only person who says awkward things. But if we can play the tape to the end, we realize, is it going to matter in the long term? Is it going to matter in a week, a year, 5 years, 10 years? And by looking at it from that perspective, we can nail down some of the uncertainty, which really helps us decide, okay, actually, this anxiety can just come with me. That's no big deal. If it flares up, I'll figure out what to do at the time. One of the really important things to think about when it comes to anxiety, though, and one of the most important aspects of it, is that avoidance will always increase anxiety. And this is how it does it. So the red here is the avoidance loop. So if we look at this anxiety, so we have the exposure, something sends us into a more anxious spot. Now we begin the exposure, we're starting to feel a little triggered, we're getting up to a 6, a 7, an 8. Typically around an 8 or a 9 is when we're gonna bail. So that's the avoidance. So avoidance, escape, all of a sudden, okay, I'm out of the situation. I didn't get used to the situation. Now, if I'm in that same situation again, I get to that peak and I'm gonna bail again. So an example, when I was working with the vets at the VA, there's a lot of fears about, I'll give one example, but there would be lots of different types of this, but like being in a movie theater. Loud noises, dark place, lots of people around, exits aren't super accessible. The escape would be, okay, I'm starting to feel it, okay, I gotta go. So now I leave the movie theater. Next time I get invited to a movie, unless I'm super motivated to go see it, I might not even go. Because I know my anxiety says you couldn't handle it last time. You're just gonna bail again. Same thing, even if I go, if my anxiety gets up to that 7, 8, and I think, ooh, remember last time you had to leave. If I do that again, that habituation happens. I start failing to get over that peak, and my body learns this as far as I can go. But we know emotions peak and then they dissipate. They do not continue forever, usually within a 5-minute span. They will peak and they will dissipate. So whether that be you need distraction, whether that means a deep breathing, or just saying, okay, I'm feeling anxious, but I'm okay. I am anxious, but I'm okay. There's no immediate threat. If you can get over that peak, you habituate to the anxiety. And it says, hey, I feel better. I can actually handle this. I didn't let anxiety push me out of the driver's seat. I stayed in the driver's seat, and next time someone invites me to a movie, I can probably handle it. So when we avoid, in any sense of the word, when we avoid because of anxiety, it sends the message to the anxiety that the anxiety is right, that we cannot handle it. So keeping that in mind helps us it gives us the opportunity to potentially push further and further on our anxiety. And if you think about your comfort zone, what we don't necessarily want, it's called flooding, which sometimes is done, but not too regularly, is something way out here. What we want is a task, something challenging that's right here. Because if I can do this task right here that's just outside my comfort zone 10, 15 times, now my comfort zone has grown. However, if I'm trying way out here, I might fail a lot before I get there. But if I can just slowly start increasing and find those things on a hierarchy of, okay, a little bit more, so I can start to get more comfortable, it's a very, very slow but positive progression. All right, now we're gonna talk about happiness. So happiness, again, I'm gonna differentiate between some wording here. Slightly, not necessarily dictionary definition changes, but something that I want you to keep in mind. So happiness, we think of as the intense and fleeting positive emotion of elation or enjoyment, but it has a very similar wave to anxiety or depression. These things peak and then they dissipate. That's how emotions work. They send their message and then they go off. Happiness is the same way. It's not something that is going to be constant. I'm not even a huge fan of pursuing happiness as the goal. What my goal for clients always is to pursue contentment. So this idea that there's a general state of satisfaction. I'm pretty content with life. And so the hope would be that there's lots of happy moments in there, but it's not all gonna be happiness because we're human and we want that stained glass. There might be some more difficult moments, but if I can say I'm generally happy with life, that's a pretty good life. One thing I want to talk about, this also goes back to the idea of positive psychology. A term that's used in there, a concept from positive psychology, is hedonic adaptation. So hedonic adaptation is this idea that we all have this set point of our general level of well-being. My guess is you all know people who tend to be very content with life. You probably all know people whose set point is pretty low. There's always something to grumble about, something to be grumpy about. They have a pretty low set point. Hedonic adaptation is really interesting because it says that Our set point stays pretty much the same regardless of outside circumstances. So the research on this, there were two different pools of people that they did research on. One was a group that won the lottery. And they noticed they had a statistically significant rise in their feeling of life satisfaction and well-being for about a year. And then it went back to their baseline. If they were generally happy to start with, they're back there. If they were generally dissatisfied to start with, it went back there. On the flip side, amputees, people who had had limb amputations, same thing. They tested their general set point, and then they noticed there was a dip for about 2 years as they adjusted to having the amputation. However, after about 2 years, they went back to their set point. If they were generally a pretty happy and content person, they were back to being a happy and content person. If they were generally more dissatisfied, they're back there. So the downside of that is we all have our set points, whether it be chemical, whether it be personality, we're all gonna have our set point. The good news is, because the research done on positive psychology, we know there are a few things that can raise our overall set point, our general level of well-being in life. One is social connections. Being able to connect socially with people who we enjoy spending time with. Interestingly, the research shows that we get the most boost from people outside our spouse and children, primarily because there's novelty to that. If I were to go meet a girlfriend for lunch, that is gonna be a different type of connection than seeing my kids for their after-school routine. There's a different kind of novelty to that. It's not to say you don't want to spend time with spouse and children and things like that, but making sure that you're also making time and space for connections outside your family. The other one, though, is gratitude. Gratitude is the number one way to boost your overall set point. It's essentially the idea of looking at things through a different light, things that might have lost their luster. So for example, you take the people who won the lottery. Everything is nice and shiny and they get to buy new things. All of that stuff fades though, unless we keep calling attention. So if it's the new job or the new partner or the new house or the promotion or a really good day that you've had, if we lose a focus on that, it doesn't boost our set point. But if we can say, here are the little joys that I experienced today. Here are the little things I'm grateful for today. Under all of that, we start boosting our overall set point and our level of contentment with happiness. And it's a great, very easy thing to include kids on. Even the youngest kid can say, what went well today? What did you like today? And it's a great thing as a culture within a family to make sure you're including. And so if this is something that you want to start doing, I usually encourage people to connect it with something they already do. So same thing again, if you're filling your water bottle, if you're waiting for your coffee to brew, if you're sitting at a stoplight, if you can connect this idea of, let me think of a couple of things I'm grateful for, tie it in maybe even with deep breathing, you have the opportunity every day, not only to call out some of those things, potentially say them to others as well, if it's gratitude you want to express to someone else, but your brain will start looking for them. If I know every night when I'm brushing my teeth, I'm going to try to think of 3 things that went well today, I'm going to look for them. On the flip side, but in the same vein, if I know that at the end of the day, I'm going to think of all the things that went wrong and I'm going to share those with my spouse and we're going to grumble about it, I'm going to be looking for those all day. So train your brain to look for what you want it to look for. And if you happen to be connected with someone who has more of that low set point, see if there's a way, not in an attacking way, but see if there's a way to pull them into the, okay, that sounds like that was really hard. Did anything go well today? Can you think of anything? But again, not from a toxic positivity standpoint. Make room for the not so good stuff, but then hopefully we want to make room for the stuff that we can express some gratitude about. All right, and then lastly, just to kind of wrap everything together, my hope with this talk is that everyone can build your own unique toolbox. I always tell my clients when they come in for the first session, we're going to be talking about lots of different things. If it doesn't work for you, if something I suggest doesn't work for you, tell me. I'm not going to know it. It is not a one size fits all. It's not one tool for one issue. There are so many different options. So by providing these options, my hope is that you can pick and choose at different points in your life what helps you manage these different emotions. And so some of the things we want to look at are what helps you to identify the emotion. It could be emotion. It might be something like the feelings wheel. It could be like going on a walk and just letting your mind wander to see what emotions come up. Being able to sit with each emotion, that might be different for different emotions. It might be really easy for you to sit with some and really difficult for others. but knowing that there are certain people maybe that you can talk to about certain emotions or certain strategies to sit with them can help. And then, again, for the different emotions, what helps you process those different things? Distracting if needed. Find your healthy distractions. Find your healthy distractions. There are lots of distractions that might help us numb out, but actually don't serve us well overall. Minimize those, maximize the ones that actually help us in the long run. And then being able to express the specific emotions to yourself, to others, calling it by name, figuring out what you need to do to it, so that voice in the back of the bus, whatever emotion it is, doesn't have to keep yelling at you. And then maintaining self-care. We've all seen the "you're not yourself when you're hungry" commercials. You cannot process emotions well when you're hungry, when you're tired, when you're thirsty, when you're dealing with big emotions in one space, trying to deal with emotions in another one. Make sure you are taking care of yourself. The analogy that I use with clients is this idea of we all have this internal rubber band, and inside that rubber band are all of our stressors. Big, little, even exciting stuff, going on a trip with friends or things like that. All of that goes in this space that takes up energy. So the outside of the rubber band is essentially how much room we have to contract or expand. So my job as therapist is typically to help clients figure out what needs to stay in the rubber band, what we can take out, what we can lower in intensity. Maybe it doesn't need to take up this much space. Maybe it can take up this much space. What things we need to put a pin in, anything to buy us some room. Because we don't want to be so maxed out that even the littlest thing snaps that rubber band. Because we don't know when a little or a big thing is coming. The other side of my job, though, too, is how do we increase the flexibility of the rubber band? How do we make sure that rubber band is not getting brittle, it's not super fragile, and has lots of room to expand and contract as needed? And self-care is one of the number one ways to do that, is making sure foundational things, sleep, nutrition, physical activity, making sure that those things are attended to, making sure social connections are good. And then lastly, being able to say, okay, even if I didn't love doing this right now, it's something I used to love, so I'm gonna do it anyways. I'm gonna fake it until I feel it, because I know usually this brings me joy. So I'm gonna keep doing it. So as my kind of challenge to all of you is to evaluate your rubber band. Not only what's inside it and where some of these other emotions might play a role, but very much so also, what can you do to increase the flexibility of your rubber band? Or if you have loved ones going through a hard time, how can you help them to increase the flexibility of their rubber band? Because the more flexible your rubber band is, the less thrown off you'll be when those big emotions might come. Okay? All right, that is all for the information part. Yes, question?
Can you elaborate a little bit on the point where it says... Yes, hi.
Hi.
Can you elaborate on the tool that says distract if needed?
Yes. So, oops, if I can find it. So if the emotion is really big, distraction is okay. What we want to differentiate is between distraction and avoidance. So if I am someone who says, I'm just going to work as hard as I can and just focus on work because I don't want to deal with this stuff over here, that's not super healthy distraction. But if I say, okay, I can't do anything about this issue right here, right now, I got to get done with this work project. Let me use this as a distraction now, but I'm coming back to that tonight. Or I have a therapy session tomorrow, or I have this walk with a friend later this week. That's what I'm going to deal with it. So you put a pin in it, but you got to make sure to circle back around. So finding the distractions that end up being healthy ones ends up serving to kind of bring down that intensity. So when we do get to the point where we want to process it or sit with it, we're feeling like we have a little more room in that rubber band. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
Hey, online, if you guys have questions, you can definitely hop in on this.
That you speak about some of the negative connotations, like with fear or sadness. Mm-hmm. And McGray mentioned this a couple of weeks ago in his sermon, that they're value neutral. Mm-hmm. So is that always the case? Like if there's a strong rush of sadness and it's on that scale, it's an 8 or a 9, and we don't recognize or identify that, as you mentioned, to lower that intensity, then if we dwell on that, does it become then value negative?
Not necessarily. What we want to do is we want to recognize it's just a messenger. It's saying, hey, you're feeling something about this. What my curiosity then is, what is the message it's trying to send? The emotion itself is not the message. It's what am I afraid of? What's the why behind the emotion? So if I can figure out what the emotion is, then I can start looking deeper. And it's not that it becomes a negative, it's just something then I can either decide to have action around or acceptance with. The feeling, though, can be painful. And that's where we can start maybe avoiding a certain emotion because we don't have the tools to process it. And to be honest, even if you are very comfortable with a lot of emotions, if I gave you the option between experiencing fear or experiencing happiness, my guess is you're going to pick happiness because of the dopamine and the serotonin and the things that go along with that versus a dump of cortisol, which doesn't feel good in our body. So there are certain things associated with that don't feel good, but when we get fearful of them is when we get ourselves in trouble, because then we start avoiding and they start getting louder and louder and they start driving.
So all of these emotions are value neutral in that respect?
I would say kind of a different way to say it is they're all valuable. As opposed to positive or negative, I think being able to say they're all valuable. And we want to make room for all of them because they're all trying to send us some kind of message.
By recognizing that the recognition versus reaction.
Mm-hmm. The reaction versus the response. Gotcha. And what we want to do with it puts us in the driver's seat. Typically, we feel the most fear or discomfort around an emotion when we don't know how to handle it and we feel like it's going to shove us out of the driver's seat. And all of a sudden, we're out of control. But if we can stay in control, they're not so scary. All right.
Yeah, we have a couple online. Okay.
All right, so I'll do 2 questions from online for right now. The first is from Will Keller. Do you have any readings or books on positive psychology that a layperson would understand? Yes,
Martin Seligman's. Martin Seligman is a wonderful, he's kind of, again, that forefather. He wrote a book called Flourish. That's a really good one. Another one is an author named Tal Ben-Shahar. He wrote a book, if anyone in here is a perfectionist or knows someone who's a perfectionist, he wrote a book called The Pursuit of Perfect. He also wrote a book called Happiness, and both of those are really good, strength-based, how to increase overall level of contentment and things like that.
Awesome, thank you. And another question is from Michelle. Please explain more about toxic positivity. What do you mean by that? So toxic positivity is essentially this idea, and again, we probably all know people who fall within this realm of, I'll give an example. If my daughter was to come home and say, "Oh, Mom, it was a really tough day today." If I were to say, "Well, what good happened? Let's think about the good stuff. Don't think about the bad stuff. What's the good stuff that happened?" I might have good intentions of, I don't really want her to stay there. I want her to focus on the good stuff, but I've just invalidated what she's said. And what the message I send is, those feelings aren't okay. You're not allowed to feel that stuff. Either I'm not comfortable with it or you're not comfortable with it, as opposed to me being able to say, what wasn't good? Tell me. And I can make space for it, I can validate it, and then it might be way later on tonight while she's going to bed. I might say, I know it was a really tough day today. I know you had some stuff that wasn't great. Is there anything that you think was like a little bit good today? Just to pull that in. So it's not about saying it all has to be good. It's about making room for the fact that you can hold those things at the same time. The biggest benefit of this is that if I were to say, tell me something good, her gut reaction, and this is what all humans will do, our gut reaction is to double down. It's, well, she's not believing me. Let me tell her how bad of a day it was. She's not necessarily going to be swayed. And if she is swayed, it's because she's acting like a people pleaser and saying, ooh, Mom doesn't want to hear about the negative stuff. Let me focus on the positive. But more likely than not, if we try to always pull towards positivity, it becomes so toxic because it doesn't make room for the other stuff. Just like we might try to numb out the negative, we can't just focus on the positive and expect to have a really full life or get comfortable with our emotions in that way. Oh, we got one more up here. Do we have time?
Good,
yeah.
good.
Yeah. She's coming.
So you were talking about the anxiety curve and avoiding the circular pattern. What are some ways and tools that you tell people to break that pattern and get through?
To get over the hump? That's a great question. So it's essentially habituating to it. So you might have, there's a type of therapy called prolonged exposure. And so this is the idea, if I have someone who has a fear of flying, I'm not gonna say, okay, great, I'm gonna teach you some deep breathing and you're going on a plane next week. First, we're gonna start, if this is a real intense fear, we might do some deep breathing. And then it might be watching movies with people in planes. It might be watching things on the news about planes. It might be simulating a plane experience. It might be going to the airport and watching planes take off. But that, again, you have that little comfort zone, and then you want to get bigger and bigger. And so when we have those little pieces that we can start pulling into our circle, it doesn't have to be a huge amount of habituation. We just need a little bit to get over the little hump. So something like that could be the deep breathing for sure. It could be a mantra, like something like, in this moment, I am okay. In this moment, I am okay. All you're doing is buying yourself time. That wave progresses just because of time, not because of anything we do. If we can sit with it long enough to go over the peak by reminding ourselves, I am okay. In this moment, I am safe. I am safe. I am okay. There's people around me. I am okay. Those kinds of things can get us over the hump, along with something like distraction. So for example, the vets that I would talk to who had the fear of the movie theater, I would have them find a movie they were really excited about. Because if they can get lost in the movie, they move through this without even realizing they're moving through it. But if they're watching a movie that they don't want to watch, they're all internal. They're only thinking about what's going on inside of them. And that's a lot harder to move over that peak and to push through it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, there's one way back there.
From a scale of 1 to 10, when should we tell someone about our emotion?
Whenever you want. I would say it like a 3. I think if there's a trusted person that you can start comfortably sharing emotions with, good, bad, or otherwise, why not? I'm actually a really big fan too of having some comfort people outside your family to talk to. And so whether that be like a school counselor, one thing I always talk about is, as my kids get older, again, they're only 6 and 8 now, when they're in middle school, I am fully planning to connect them with someone in the community that they can talk to, that I trust as a professional, who I have no connection with. And I might say, okay, you're gonna go 3 or 4 times, they're gonna learn your backstory. If you wanna talk to them about stuff at school, you can. If not, no big deal. But that way they have a person. And they can, if they aren't seeing them regularly, they can say, hey mom, can I talk to so-and-so this week? No questions asked, they have someone. Parents can be a great resource. Helpful friends can be a great resource, but also talking to someone professionally too, if it gets to be bigger emotions, can be really helpful too, because they're outside of that little group of family. Mm-hmm. Go.
All right. I'm going to hear the other mic. There's one more here.
Okay, deal. We've just got a few more in the online. From Cindy, we have, how would you suggest dealing with someone who is experiencing severe anger towards you, and what is the best way to respond to that anger?
It somewhat depends, without much context, it somewhat depends on what the situation is and how they're expressing it. If it's something passive-aggressive versus overtly aggressive, either way though, my kind of top line recommendation would be to talk with them about it outside of a big social setting, not via text. I'm not a big fan of text in terms of trying to communicate things like that. If it's to just initially plant the seed, text would be okay, but it might be something along the lines, either in person or via text of, hey, it seems like things are a little off between us. I'm wondering if there's a time that we could talk. I'm wondering if there's anything that you want to share with me. It seems like there's a little bit of a rift in our relationship right now. If they choose not to, that's up to them. And at that point, then I get to the place of action or acceptance. Do I need to set any boundaries with this person? Do I want to just continue to be kind? Or do I need to just respect their boundary? And recognize that if and when they want my side of the story, I could share it. I could even say, there's a little bit more to this story. I totally understand if you need some space, but I'd love to explain my perspective on it if and when you're open to it. And that way it stays very neutral. It's never helpful to force someone to be your friend or force someone to not be angry with you. And sometimes we have to kind of swallow our own pride and say, maybe I did mess up and I didn't mean to do it in that way or unintentionally hurt you in this way. And here's what I want to do to rectify it. And then they get to decide if that's enough or not.
Yeah, thank you. And one more question from Nicole. Do you have any suggestions about how to reflect on emotions or decisions after an event to cope better next time?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a big fan of brain dumps. So essentially this idea of just take out a piece of paper or type. A lot of my college-age kids do this on their phone. They can type so fast on their phone. Just dump everything in your brain. If it's an event, we do know when it comes to trauma, being able to process trauma most effectively right after an event, talking about what happened is a really, really good buffer against PTSD down the road. versus bottling it up and not sharing it with anyone. So being able, whether it be get it down on paper, it helps us analyze it in a different way. And we can start looking at patterns. If it is something that's maybe happening more regularly or something we want to learn from, just getting everything out to start with, either on paper or with a friend, can be a great way to make sure that we learn and grow from each situation.
Thank you.
I think this will be our last question officially. We'll close it if you're willing to stay.
And I'm
for a
staying
little
after, yeah. If anyone wants to come up and ask after, I'm here too.
Okay, when you have someone who has dementia and who is fine with everybody else, but they're a child, and they are saying extremely horrible, hurtful things, and on one hand, cognitively, you're saying it's a disease, talking, but you cannot shut down the emotions, the extreme emotions of anger and depression that their hurtful sayings do to you. So can you address that?
Yes, so that's a should. So this idea of
between the cognitive
yes.
and the emotion, that you cannot cognitively talk yourself out of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this idea of the shoulds plays out in that perspective, or in that situation, because we might look at that and say that person shouldn't say that. But I know they're dealing with this. I wish they wouldn't say those things. I understand it's a disease. I understand it's not their choice. But now we are down to action or acceptance. After the shoulds, we get down to action or acceptance. So action could be talking about it. If they're in any kind of therapies or anything like that, being able to share with that therapist, here, this is something that's going on. The other piece is protecting the other person and allowing that person to set boundaries, making sure that person has someone to go talk to, friend, family, therapist, to be able to work through the hurtful things that are being said. Essentially what we want is we want that person kind of in a jelly jar. We want them protected, so if those things come at them, they bounce off. So there's two parties there. One might not have much change available to them. If the other one does, though, it can mitigate a lot of that negativity from coming through and impacting them, but it's a really hard thing to watch it happen. And so finding ways to support the person who's essentially the target of those things is likely your best bet. Okay, all right.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Sermon. I hope you found Dr. Erica Clarke's insights really helpful. I thought they were huge in balancing happiness, contentment, anxiety, stressors, the whole gamut of emotions, and laying them all out and balancing them all, and not saying that one is necessarily better than the other, but just that they all exist and they're all real. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can go to the notes section down below where you can find links to her slides and to her handouts. And if you're listening on podcast, you can also find those in the show notes as well. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode, and I'll see you next week.